Hi, my name is Hannah An, a recent graduate from the graphic design program at MICA, and I'll be presenting my degree project Lateral Thinking, an attempt to revisit the typical design education to advocate for a more inclusive learning experience. There are three parts to this project: a reimagined curriculum, course outlines, and a series of visual explorations. Realizing how Eurocentric design education is, I started off my project by trying to inform myself about the idea of decolonization in the design context through readings and lectures. Here you can see some of the notes I've been taking. I tried to gain as much perspective as I could, acknowledging how broad the definition could be, but also narrow at the same time. After learning about what these authors had to say about the topic, I became curious about what my peers thought, who were mostly seniors like me finishing up their undergrad. So I sent out a survey to ask what they think about their experience and where they see room for opportunity. And based on their responses and the discussions I've had with them, I began to list some ideas that could be implemented into this new curriculum I was trying to come up with. Here you're seeing some of the drafts I tried to put together based on that. After a series of sketches and brainstorming, I established 6 specific principles of what I believe demonstrates decolonial design. First being decentering universal aesthetics, meaning shifting away from the typical good graphic design, which is mostly a lot of grids, sans serif typefaces, and a lot of white space. And this comes from modernism, and modernism claims to be the universally accepted style despite its European origin and focus on westernized standards. The next one is including, not othering. While the critique environment in design schools has the benefit of allowing students to receive feedback from people within the industry, the reality is that we're actually working with people outside of design too, and everyone is a participant of the visual language. So this one acknowledges that. The third principle is redefining the designer-client relationship. The language around how graphic design is taught in design schools implies that the designer has to educate clients about what good graphic design is. But again, everyone's a participant of the visual language. Um, the fourth one is expanding the designer's toolbox. This typical toolbox has been dominated by the Adobe Creative Suite. But to actually decolonize aspects of our individual design practices, we need to revisit the software we work with and consider other tools such as open source tools and other non-designerly tools as well. Elimination of false distinction between craft and design. There's an underlying assumption that craft is different from and inferior to design. And this comes from, again, the Eurocentric perspective, undermining design practices of non-Western cultures by labeling them as craft. My last principle was understanding the designer's audience. We're trained to be capable of taking on whatever type of project we're given with not much consideration of our identity and who we're actually designing for. But we really have to think about how we fit in the creative process and our audience. So considering passing on projects to the right people. So in my first phase of my development, I tried to sketch out a curriculum with a foundation year and without one, and really trying to compare which one provides more flexibility for students to explore design that is not confined by the Eurocentric standards. In my second phase, I was trying to really make sure that this curriculum is providing both the technical skills that will get students jobs, but also the awareness about decolonization, making sure that this balanced navigation is implemented in all of the courses throughout the 4 years. So this phase was really structuring out the curriculum and really framing the overall curriculum. In addition to this, I started developing a list of potential electives to demonstrate what courses could be made to specifically dedicated to decolonizing design. Again, these are just examples, but it was made in the assumption that more courses would be created that are similar to this, that speak the same language as these. After that second phase, in my third phase, I worked closely with my advising professors, Isaac and Dare. It was really mostly about figuring out the practical things, weighing credit hours based on priority of classes, and really refining the language so they all speak back to the six principles that I've been emphasizing throughout. And yeah, after developing the frameworks of this curriculum, I worked on simplified syllabi for 2 proposed courses dedicated to decolonizing design. You're currently looking at design theory, which is an academic course about decolonization, structured with a series of guest speakers tackling different topics within the broad topic of decolonization. And this course is design practice, which is basically taking those the theory that students have learned in the previous course and really just applying it to their own design practice. Projects would include recreating past projects with open source tools and designing an anti-modernist poster, for example. In addition to all of this, I did a series of visual explorations, each in response to each principle to demonstrate what design could look like as an outcome of this proposed curriculum. On the left, you're seeing my study of contemporary Korean graphic design, which is my attempt of avoiding Eurocentric graphic design in a way. Here you can see that I was trying to reimagine the designer's workspace by thinking of alternative tools. On the left, that was made in Google Sheets, and I was trying to avoid using the Adobe suite in a way to sort of speak to that idea again. Yeah, basically all of this was compiled into a publication, which I'm hoping to share online sometime soon. Going into this project, I knew that there would not be a clear end since decolonization itself is a very long process and there's so many perspectives on it. And my project is just one of the various perspectives. So I hope I was able to contribute to the larger discussion of decolonizing design education. Thank you for listening.
Hello, my name is Amrita Datta. I'm a recent graduate from Indiana University, and my research focused on envisioning art and design education through the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion at Herron School of Art and Design. I use people-centered design research approaches to build an understanding of DEI in art and design schools within the North American context. The legacy of discrimination caused by urban policies has fueled the need to construct more inclusive communities. The murder of George Floyd has culminated in a movement to end racial inequities. Therefore, communities nationwide are embracing historical injustice spanning race, gender, religion, and disability benefits. Higher education is prioritizing them. According to a study derived from the 2016 Bureau of Labor Statistics, there is a huge gap between white designers and their diverse counterparts. The data underscores that the design profession at large is severely lacking when it comes to racial, cultural, and gender diversity. The modern university is an ideal environment where history should be taught and disseminated to educate students on the diversity of design. As a result, I decided to focus on Herron School of Art and Design as my research base. Indianapolis is a Midwestern city home to a large youth population with young people of color representing a substantial segment. Herron School of Art and Design, just like many other institutions throughout the Western Hemisphere, is part of a larger educational apparatus that has been molded by Eurocentric educational values. As a result, I base my research question on how might we better enable design faculty to implement DEI strategies that decolonize art and design for undergraduate students at Herron? DEI serves as a useful tool for organizations to adapt to demographic shifts, social mobility, migration, and immigration. Discussions about DEI provides a talking point centered around contemporary campus life. The time students spend on campus represents an important aspect of a student's development as they learn more about themselves and their identity. DEI can only be understood by researching on the intersection of identity, race, and culture in the North American university system. 3 important details to consider are all universities are unique and all education systems are equally diverse. Institutional data regarding diversity comes from national agencies, and therefore there is no universal way of measuring the understanding of diversity. Herron School of Art and Design is a college within Indiana University. It is located on the ancestral territory of native tribes where the city of Indianapolis was founded. The city was built by European immigrant settlers in the 1830s and saw an influx of African American settlers shortly. Studying the Herron context provides useful insight into how other art colleges and design schools might address future DEI issues. Currently, there is no consistent framework for professors at Herron to implement DEI strategies in their teaching. The desired outcome of this project was to advocate for strategies that would promote cultural awareness and decolonize design. Overall, people-centered design approach was utilized throughout the project, which consisted of a non-linear framework with steps that allowed me to shift in between the stages. For the understand stage, online interviews were chosen as an appropriate way of gathering information and gaining insight to uncover first-hand accounts of the user needs, desires, and expectations about the research question. All participants in this method were art and design experts within Herron School of Art and Design with a minimum of 5 years of experience. After conducting the method, a framework was developed as a guide to refer to the needs, desires, and challenges for the research. The interviews uncovered ideas and existing thoughts. The initial research mostly unearthed the need to raise awareness regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion. Additionally, educators wanted a more unified understanding of DEI strategies. The figure above outlines the proposal of a multi-step digital experience to foster a sense of inclusion among professors within the community and beyond core structures. A platform was suggested to provide a more collective experience for a multifaceted collection of identities and a sense of belonging through a pedagogical partnership. The interviews sought to help educators in their efforts to integrate DEI strategies into their teaching curriculum. It was important to build a background of user personas to understand how users would operate within the proposed system. The first persona was referred to as John, who is an associate professor at Herron. John is currently trying to understand the challenges of advancing diversity in higher education. Persona 2 was referred as Martin, who is an associate professor and program director at Herron. He has had a leadership role for the past 5 years. He believes one of the main issues in higher education is that there is no syllabus available for teachers. Having a consistent guideline on how protocols, including DEI, should be implemented into the classrooms would be beneficial. Developing a story prompted the next step in ideation stage, which was to create the sitemap that demonstrated the structure of the application. Multiple iterations were designed to ensure that the sections that needed to be highlighted in the workflow of the screens. The sitemap provided a glimpse of the narrative that needed to be developed. In my final sitemap iteration, I started establishing features of my dashboard and objective screen. I was able to envision how to include curricular development through the lens of DEI. As a commitment to recenter DEI strategies, the workflow cultivated a critical outline for simple prototype design. The process started by creating several wireframe and prototypes, which was fundamental in developing a proposed solution. The design gradually transitioned to focus on different DEI techniques to support students. Finally, the version that was shared for the evaluation session was called Blind Spots. The final prototype that was created as a concept idea included a sign-in system with different themes and elements of DEI. The app enabled educators to set DEI goals for each week to connect with students. Features of the wireframe design allowed educators to search for resources when planning their syllabus, or if educators were interested in viewing a checklist that helped them to prepare for the first day of class. The evaluation session focused on expanding more inclusive beliefs through the tool. The participants articulated how this tool is language inclusive and exposed them to topics they were previously unaware of. Educators described their hopes that the tool would help them design their syllabi, be more inclusive to students of color, and build their diversity statements. Due to time constraints, the project only focused on DEI strategies at Herron. Further research and solution development could assess the efficacy of DEI practices and challenges that Herron may face in the future. This aspect of decolonization fights for marginalized people and communities that have been forcefully segregated by the systems of the society. The prototype encourages educators to create a space of belonging and instill radical reform. Thank you so much for listening to me. You can learn more about my work at amritadatta.myportfolio.com. Thank you.
Hi everyone. I will present my project, the digital photo album, today. And this project idea was originated from the time that we stay at home during the pandemic period. And it's a web-based design, and I did this project by myself. It's basically like user can interact with photographs by uploading their own images, and also they will closely interact with photographs while the sound is on. And During this project, I got two inspirations from Gary Simons and Yuri Suzuki. The Gary Simons project, the viewer can move the mouse on the screen and the fragment of images will come up and then fade quickly. And Yuri Suzuki connects people's sound over word together. And I also found the strong relationship between emotion and memory. And also I want to know more about the combination of photos and sounds. And then I conducted expert interview with Hojin Tai. And this is my initial intention, which is to do the experiment with users and try to play around with all the combination of photos and sound to try to get their sense of memory in a way to accommodate their emotion. So this is my paper prototype. I videoed the whole process of user doing this, and I got for interaction mode and want to see how they how their impression of this. So after the paper prototype, I got their feedback like they had strong impression of this interaction mode, but the music is somehow a little bit distract their attention of those interaction with images. However, the interaction mode is effective, so I firstly using the p5.js to write the code down. And p5 is really convenient for me to easily write my initial intention down to play around. And this is how the images looks like after the effect of those interaction modes. And this can form a vague impression of the photo. So I want to see how different multiple images come together and how their effect looks like. The first one is where I combined several images together, and when the mouse is over the screen, there a big fragment of photos comes out. And there are two other ways of interaction mode that I used. And then I decided to do another round of user testing. As you can see, this round of user testing, the user has gives me an impression that they looks like they are more immersed in the process, and also I found some other issues, and like he did respond that he was reminded of his own experience in state college with the sound of working on leaves. But I also found other issues like the transition between one interaction mode to another mode is kind of, not really usability and inclusive. So I finally to edit all those correction and form this final design that I want to have a sunlight shine on the photo album, and when the sound stop, when the time stop. So this is the first stage when user enters the website, that they can upload their own images and the sound, and then it will comes out the whole display of those images they have uploaded, and the user can scroll the mouse on this digital photo album, and they can first see how their images look like, and also they can go back to change the images. And I designed to change the interaction mode as the user can also scroll the mouse, or they can flip the page to change the interaction mode. As you can see on the right corner, you can flip the page. And also the display mode. This is happened when you select multiple images at one time, and the images is automatically displayed by the computer, like looks like this. This is one of the ways to display, and these are the two other ways of the display mode. And these are my own images, and I haven't decided whether user can choose to change the location of the images or So finally, I found that user testing is strictly important for this project, that their feedback can help me proceed the next round of user testing, next round of writing the code, and especially writing the code with p5.js is really fun for me. And that's all my presentation today. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Heer Mandalia. I come from the western part of India where people casually pass comment on your appearance. They'll say, "You look like you're enjoying New York City," which translates to, "You have gained 10 pounds." I've always struggled with my weight. I've been known as that overweight girl in high school, middle school, and even college. And I started using clothing to my advantage. And ever since, dressing up has become a part of my everyday life. It contributes to my confidence and mood for the day, which led me to the investigation of effects of material aesthetic on self-presentation. Think about the time when you met or saw the person for the first time. According to DeLong M., we observe the people in this four-step theory. First, we observe them as a whole. Second, we observe the shapes, texture, garment, and accessories and how that relate to the body. Third, we observe the specific component in their social cultural context. For example, if somebody is wearing a red band on their hand, it denotes that they come from a Hindu culture. And fourth is the context of a viewer. If a person who's viewing knows about the Hindu culture, they'll be able to make assumptions based on the red band. But if they are not aware about the culture, they won't be able to make assumptions. Our self-presentation is denoted by a lot of factors. Today, I'm going to discuss these four: cultural background, monetary status, body type, and socially valued identity. First, the cultural background. If I was walking down the streets of New York City wearing something like this, it would be considered strange or even a costume. If I was wearing something like this, it would be considered totally normal. But if a person coming from the same cultural background as mine would look at my clothing, they would think that it's totally normal. So it depends on what culture you're coming from and how you see and perceive other person. Which leads to me the first of my many questions. How can the symbolic cultural presentation affect our visual identity? Which led me to exploration of this installation. This installation is made out of many layers. These layers represent the social, cultural, geographical, religious layers that forms who we are, as a person, and how that reflects into our visual identity that we put out in the world every day. Moving on to monetary status. If I walk in a room full of people wearing a similar shoe, which shoe do you think will stand out the most? The one which has a higher brand, like Balenciaga. The visual aesthetic is not just important, but also the brand association with it. The people who wear the higher branded shoes will have a different kind of a personality. They want to say something from their visual appearance through the brands that they associate with, which leads to my next question. Can physical presentation affect the hierarchy of power? Moving on to body type. Body type is an inevitable part of your self-presentation and who you are. As I said, I've always suffered with my confidence issues, and I've started using clothing to my advantage to feel more confident in my body. But it not just depends on how other people sees you, but it also depends on how you feel in it. The more confident you feel in the way you are, the more confident you will project in the world. That's how the perceiver would think that you are more confident and strong in the way that you present yourself. So it just not depends on the viewer, but it also depends on how you are and how you see yourself. Which leads to my next question. How can our inside affect our outer presentation? Which leads me to this meeting of this hypothetical space where there are floating words and guiding lights in this dark room, which makes you think about how does your appearance interact in your everyday life. It asks you questions like, what defines you? Does appearance matter? And it's guided by some sounds like this. Moving on to socially valued identity. This theory is based on how you are perceived in your social network and how your social network sees things. It can form a positive or a negative body image of self. People also alter their body, their clothing, their styles to feel more accepted in their social network. For example, in Princess Diaries, when the lead Mia found out that she was a princess, she changed her appearance to fit in this more suitable role of a princess or how princess should look like. As even similar in our lives, the people around us form our appearance. They inform the way we dress because they have more appearance, and in vice versa, maybe you inform them about your appearance and they might change it accordingly. Which leads to next question. How does material surrounding reflect our self-presentation? To explore these more aspects of self-presentation, I made an installation called Mental Mark. It lives at Pratt Institute. This installation invites the viewers and questions the viewers with this various thing. This 9-piece installation divides and distorts your persona and your perception of self. It divides these parts so that you can think about what does this part means to you? What if I change my shoes? What if I change my jacket? How is that going to affect my identity? Or how is that going to affect the perception of you in the world? I invited various viewers during this process and asked them how that installation made them feel. A lot of viewers send me a feedback form back, and some of them are here. I mostly see the mirror as a whole. The installation gave me a chance to think about myself more separately, how these different parts of you makes you feel, how the shoes makes you feel. Maybe if a different shoe would make you feel a little bit more bright, or maybe a little bit more confident, or maybe not. Another viewer said, it makes me think about how each part of our body alone doesn't make who we are, but all of them together begin to form your identifiable personality. Everything in your persona has a different makes you who you are. Maybe it's a nose ring, maybe it's a hat, maybe it's a jacket, maybe it's just wearing a black t-shirt, or maybe just wearing like a gray t-shirt like Mark Zuckerberg wears every day. It makes his personality just by clothing. And I'm going to leave you with last question. How can we use our material extension to extend or amplify our identity? How can we use clothes, accessories to say who we are? How can we use it in the positive light? How has that made us who we are? Maybe look at the appearance in a different perspective in this social media age. How can we use it as a power rather than a tool to take people down? So thank you.
Hi, I'm Zainab Marvi, and I'm currently doing my MSc in Design Research from the Bauhaus Dessau Foundation. My thesis is focused on feminist practices in an urban city, identifying alternative ways of knowing and living through the use of public transport in Karachi. This is an ongoing research, so I will briefly touch upon the feminist theories I'm basing my research on, my positionality as a researcher, gendered commute in Karachi, and how I had designed my methodology to gain insights and the challenges that came along the way. To give a short overview on how cities are gendered spaces and how this informs my methodology, I've included this quote by feminist scholar Joy Kennedy, who questions whether we view the world differently because of our gender. If so, then how do these views intersect with culture, environment, and history? Every time I read this quote, it brings a heightened sense of awareness as to how much autonomy I, as a woman, possess when I wield my right to live and breathe in a safe and inclusive urban environment. So I begin by exploring the concept of a feminist city and what feminists right to the city would entail. Is it a city that values the lived realities of everyone, regardless of their gender, age, disabilities, religion, or sexuality? My methodology borrows greatly from the theory of intersectionality, which is a critical concept in the understanding of how gender, class, race, and ethnicity are not separate areas and are actually intricately interconnected. Intersectionality is closely linked to feminist standpoint theory, which emphasizes women's knowledge as socially situated. Hence, knowledge produced from those who are socially situated at the margins can serve as a point of departure or inquiry into alternative ways of knowing and living. With that being said, I am situating my research in the metropolis of Karachi, Pakistan. Karachi is the largest city in Pakistan and is ranked as fifth largest city worldwide. According to formal census, its population is 20 million. It is the economic and business hub. It is also the most linguistically and ethnically heterogeneous city where people of multiple faiths, ethnicities, and languages reside, including refugees. It is a city where people from all over the country come for work opportunities. To explain my positionality as a designer and researcher, it is important for me to begin from the geography closest to me. That is my everyday embodied experience of navigating and moving through Karachi. I have grown up, lived, and worked there all my life. I've commuted in rickshaws, buses, and chinchis alone. I have walked on the roads, footpaths, and pedestrian bridges on my own, but never in leisure. And so, this forms the point of departure from where I explore and research. In feminist geography, one of the major flaws in the city is the mobility and transportation, which restricts and constricts freedom of movement, which in turn impacts the way women and the marginalized move through the city. Karachi suffers from a lack of effective and efficient transport service. There is no one single mass transit system, despite the fact that almost 50% of the population depends on public transport. Rickshaws are the second most popular transport mode after buses. Women especially rely more on rickshaws because it provides door-to-door services and also it is found in all areas of the city. I'm probing how women navigate the city differently through the use of public transport, primarily rickshaws. This thesis maps their commuting patterns and behaviors in order to uncover the unspoken communal practices, the common threads, and the anomalies that reveal how women have adapted to a gendered urban space. This research was conducted through digital communication methods remotely from Germany due to the pandemic. The research comprises an online survey targeted at women across different income groups, professions, and localities of Karachi. To complement the online survey, I also reached out to women through WhatsApp who were less likely to be on social media. Additionally, the research includes the experiences of male identifying rickshaw drivers who play a crucial role as navigators to ascertain whether they make distinction in routes when driving women as opposed to driving men. These questions were posed to women to understand the social, cultural, and economic patterns around commuting. What kind of feminist practices will be unveiled through these questions and the consequent answers? This research attempts to identify multiplicity of feminist practices to broaden our understanding of gendered commute and acts of everyday resistance against this genderization. The initial aim behind the online survey was to recruit participants for the research methods I had devised that range from walking interviews, maintaining a WhatsApp diary, and tracking their GIS location. However, these methods became nullified once I started conducting informal interviews with salaried women. Some of them did not have phones or didn't want to use phones during their commute due to fear of being mugged. Due to the remote nature of this research, it was difficult getting in touch with people in Karachi. The biggest challenge was finding ways around normal modes of digital communication. Most of the people I spoke to had small keypad phones, so Zoom, Meet, Google Meet, or WhatsApp were out of the question. Thus, my parents became my mediators. They went around the city using their phones to connect me with people over WhatsApp. Also, none of these interviews could be scheduled in advance. I had to be on alert, sometimes woken up at 4 a.m. even, due to the time difference and because it was not possible to talk to them outside of their work hours. I was given a very short span of time to ask questions, so my focus often became less on listening attentively to their responses. This research also entailed many recording fiascos. Since these conversations were unscheduled, I had installed a recording app to automatically record WhatsApp calls. The first one didn't capture 3 of my calls, so I installed another app. That one only recorded my side of the conversations. So I had to then remain glued to my laptop for online recording services and could barely step out of my room for the entire duration of the week. These three diverse forms of data sets that I have collected help not only in analyzing multiple ways of living, but also to question the standard ways of communication and navigation design in urban spaces. How can perception of design be shifted away from planning and solutionism towards maintenance and care? And last, are design interventions even needed where people seem content living with contradictions? And so I have reached the end. Thank you very much for your interest. I look forward to your questions and feedback.
Political cartoons have historically been used as tools of persuasion. They can be read as the people's history of a country. What happens when they're used as an advertising and marketing tool for a consumer brand? It is this question that led me to look into Amul's cartoon advertisements. Amul is a cooperative that started in the state of Gujarat by farmers who were exploited by Paulsons, a butter and coffee company that had a monopoly over the Indian market until the 1960s. In the face of an increasing competition from Paulsons, Dr. Verghese Kurian, the chairman of the cooperative, approached an ad agency in Bombay to help brand and sell their butter. Eustace Fernandez and Sylvester Dacona, along with a team of filmmakers, writers, and art directors, designed the Amul mascot in 1966. She appeared on product packaging and ads with the tagline "Utterly Butterly Delicious." She was an instant hit with children and homemakers in urban India. The Amul girl was definitely not the first advertising mascot, but she was the first one with a personality. She increased the brand's visibility. Today, the cooperative spends less than 1% of their revenue on advertising, and yet Amul Butter has a market share of 85% with little to no competition from regional brands. The cartoon ads first appeared on billboards in an elite neighborhood in South Bombay and eventually all over the city. Amul has made more than 4,000 cartoon ads, and their billboard campaign continues to be the longest running one for any Indian brand. Today, Amul shares these cartoons on their social media too. The messaging in these ads has evolved significantly through the decades. The billboard on the left is Amul's first ever ad, a simple butter pun. This was followed by commentary on issues that were of interest to an upper middle class consumer, their primary audience, people with buying power. We don't see a lot of political commentary in this decade yet. As we approach the late 80s, a time of significant political upheaval, we start seeing messages that are of concern to a middle class consumer. The cartoons get bolder and do not shy away from taking a jibe at people in power. In the 90s, India undergoes a neoliberal economic reform. With this, there is an influx of pop culture that is both domestic and foreign. We start seeing references to Bollywood movies, international politics, but there is also an increased number of dissenting political cartoons against the state. This is best illustrated by the cartoon in the center that is pro self determination of Kashmiris in the face of an Indian regime that threatens to occupy their land, or from the pro Palestine cartoon post attacks on Gaza in early 2014. By this point, Amul had identified their three golden geese: politics, sports, and pop culture. The Amul girl's childish charm and wit, combined with the bright primary colors and the consistent watercolor treatment in the ads, draw the audience into a nostalgic good old past while placing the mascot in an ever changing political landscape. Over the years, the Amul girl has become a childhood and pop culture icon for two generations. She's a beacon of liberal ideals and an indicator of the public sentiment of a middle class that holds major political sway. However, in the last 6 years, these advertisements have taken a sharp turn from their liberal messaging to pro state propaganda with a change in political power. BJP, a right wing party that has historically had Hindu nationalist positions, formed government with Narendra Modi as the Prime Minister. From a collection of over 1,500 ads since 2014, I've shortlisted 70 to identify certain patterns to look into for my research. These are a few images from this sample. Since Modi has been Prime Minister, there is a cult of personality through mass media and propaganda. The two ads here glorify and celebrate Modi's monogrammed suit entering the Guinness World Records as the most expensive suit sold at an auction. This news collided with one of the first hits that the Indian economy had taken since the new government had come into power. Yet, there seems to be no sense of irony in these cartoons. We see this sort of flattery repeat in these two cartoons from 2014 as well. The first one parrots the party campaign slogan, Acha Din Aaya Hai, good days are here, with a bilingual pun. The second one is a nod to Modi's appearance at Madison Square Garden in order to appease to the Hindu diaspora, which is a significant funder of the BJP's political campaign. In 2020, the BJP-led government at the center moved to ban a number of Chinese apps in response to a dispute at the Indo-Chinese border. Amal uses this as an opportunity to employ a trite, racist stereotype of China. The Amal girl is uncharacteristically aggressive. In 2020, the Supreme Court of India introduced Permanent Commission for Women in the Army. In this ad that masquerades as a progressive feminist message, it espouses a conservative pro-military stance. In 2020, the government laid foundation for a Hindu temple over ruins of a demolished mosque. Babri Masjid was attacked and demolished by a Hindu nationalist mob in 1992. This sparked communal violence across the country, and the land has been a site of dispute amongst Hindus and Muslims. In October 2019, the Supreme Court of India passed a judgment ordering that the land be handed over to a trust to build a temple. The Amal girl is shown openly embracing this fascist move. She has also taken a keen interest in various neoliberal policies introduced by the government in the last 6 years. Here, she is shown embracing and celebrating the Supreme Court's decision to uphold Aadhaar, a controversial biometric database that has been the target of many hacks and made citizens vulnerable to surveillance and corporate interests. While there was public outcry against this move, the Amal girl gives us her thumbs up. Here she is shown to be enthusiastic about the introduction of the goods and sales tax in 2016, a move that hurt many small businesses and working class people that were dependent on the informal economy. Today, Amal cartoons are fodder to right-wing trolls and aid a growingly intolerant nationalist discourse. In a country that constitutes of a majority Hindu population, brands have increasingly been the target of hate campaigns for merely championing religious harmony. According to a 2014 news report, Amal has closed ties to the BJP. In light of all this, it is imperative to consider how Amal's messaging might change with the next change in power. It begs the question of who the public is in the public sentiment that the brand claims to represent. How does illustration play a role in contributing to this political discourse, and what space do Amal's cartoons occupy in Indian visual culture? As I continue my research into these cartoons, I hope to find some of these answers. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Christopher Swift. I'm an MFA student at Vermont College of Fine Arts in the Graphic Design Department. Silas Monroe is my thesis advisor. My thesis project is titled Control. I will be sharing some highlights from a couple of projects covered in that thesis. The majority of the work you'll see on the next 19 slides is code-based generative art made in collaboration with machine learning. My thesis is about moving away from my need for control over the design process and trusting my collaborators, human and non-human, to make amazing things. My early attempts at this focused on coding new tools or modifying traditional ones in an attempt at a sort of collaboration. These posters were made using a few generative programs I wrote for P5.js. These slides show the output of a program I wrote in processing that creates unique zines each time it's run. The placement of the margins, text blocks, image dimensions, and locations are randomly determined for each page each time the program runs. I made these zines, but I didn't design them. They were auto-generated by a program I wrote. In these projects, I had introduced a kind of agency through randomness that the programs I'd written could act on. While they produced new and often delightful outputs, they were still only able to develop along the lines that I had determined. They could only act as freely as I let them. So for me, this was a failure, as I was still very much in control of the process and the results. The project I wanted to focus on today is my most recent one. It is sort of speculative anthropology of the unknown and the almost and the maybe. The project explores alternative versions of designed objects important to me in my youth, created in collaboration with a range of generative tools. These projects are all the product of machine learning and AI models. They're very, very weird. The massive and complex spaces that these models work in can often lead to very alien-feeling encounters. Objects that feel somewhat recognizable but scrambled or out of tune in some way. These are GAN-generated typographic posters trained on data scraped from Trendlist. This project uses text-to-image models to create its outputs. I write a description of what I want, here a RoboCop poster by Beggarstaffs and a 2001 poster by Milton Glaser, and then the AI I'm collaborating with makes thousands of versions of that thing, and then I pick the ones I think are good. These projects are an exercise in collaboration and care. They require that I trust my network of collaborators. We are making these things together. These are all things that I care about in some way, objects and experiences that shaped me growing up. Speculative album covers from bands that meant a lot to me, posters of films that shaped my youth. This huge network of collaborators is helping me explore multiple possible histories of my youth growing up in the 90s in Canada. It has been extraordinary to experience. I am not in charge of this. My role is as a member of the team. Sometimes I seem to be ignored or misunderstood. I've been asked why the work is so melty and oatmeal-hued. For me, it's a residue of translation. There's nothing clearer in this collaborative communication, but that's how I know I'm really speaking to and hearing from the other way of knowing, thinking, making. This is me and someone else, someone really far away and hard to hear. I type into a text field. Here it's a Batman movie poster by Alexander Rodchenko. I set parameters and I let the network go. After a few hours, I get something that looks like this, plus hundreds of other versions. The versions aren't building towards a perfect thing, just multiplying possible iterations. The volume can be overwhelming. The process of picking through everything that my collaborator has made from my utterance is exhilarating. I'll sometimes go to bed and let it run overnight. I might sit and watch it as it iterates across the latent space of possible outcomes. I might tell it to stop and try again. Usually I'll look at it when it's done and then smile in amazement. These tools are all really new. OpenAI blogged about 2 new models they developed in January 2021, DALL-E, shown here, and Clip, an image classification model. Within 2 weeks, a graduate student named Ryan Murdoch had developed the first of these new text-image models guided by Clip, called Big Sleep. These tools are being created and edited at an amazing pace. I primarily use Latent 3 Vision's Clip plus Taming. It's published by Ryan Murdoch, running on Google's Colab platform to create the visual outputs. I also started working with the language models to write poetry and song lyrics. The prompt for this was a poem by Emily Dickinson titled What Might Be. What might be exists, is actual, and what has been unrolls itself. A foot may enter, an eye observe, a brain may wonder, a heart may break. My thesis advisor recently asked if I could record these songs in some way, so I sort of have done that. I'm using another generative machine learning model called Jukebox AI to perform and record music. Like the visual outputs, it is sort of out of focus in a lot of ways. It is a dreamlike thing. For me, this work isn't about a product or a client. It isn't about creating a new aesthetic for myself. It is about sitting with an uncomfortable feeling I've had about myself as a designer for a while now. It's been valuable for me to examine my role in the creative process more deeply, to question what I've taken for granted in my 2 decades of work in graphic design, to think about these things we designers do and make in strange new ways. To imagine what might be the results of thinking about our roles in strange ways and through unexpected new lenses. Collaborating with an extremely non-human design partner isn't the only way to rethink our roles as designers and meaning makers, but it has been a way that's worked for me and has pushed me past where I thought I could go. And hopefully the handful of people who read my thesis will share in this productive unsettling a little. These are the questions I want you to ask of my work and maybe also yours. What if we're all part of a network and not at the center or top of it? What would it mean to how we work and what we value, to the stories we tell ourselves and each other about the work we do and why we do it? We can loosen our grip on control, accept new forms of making from new collaborators, understand ourselves as one among many, celebrate and multiply in that multitude, delight in what happens next, trust we can make something amazing together, and care for each other with beauty and courage. My overall project is not about machine learning. It is about seeing ourselves as one among many in the creative process. It is about the value of letting go of control, about trusting and caring for our collaborators, human and non-human. It's about listening to that melty voice and maybe being interested in what it might be trying to add to the conversation. If you want to see more, it's all up at christopherswift.work. Thank you for listening.
Hi, my name's DJ Trishler, and I'm a Master's of Design student at the University of Cincinnati in their School of Design, Architecture, Art, and Planning, otherwise known as DAP. I'm entering into my thesis semester where I'll be collecting data for my project, but I thought I'd show you my thesis proposal. It's tentatively called Before You Brand a Place. So place branding is seen as a process of shaping the public perception of a place through activities that positively communicate a place's uniqueness and quality of life. In the next couple slides, I'm going to look at this with some skepticism and criticality, especially what is quality of life, what is uniqueness, and what are these activities, who gets to participate, who's it good for? But first, these are some logos, visual identity systems for place brands in Cincinnati that I've collected. And one might argue that the designers who develop these in some ways dictate the future of place brands by the language, the names, the colors that they pick. And these place branding exercises happen everywhere from alleys to states. And they're supposed to differentiate, right? They're supposed to show off uniqueness, but they actually start to look the same. A scholar collected an alphabet of these logos showing their sameness here. And oftentimes the description used are like cosmopolitan and creative, which that's not that unique necessarily to a group of people, especially when you look closer. And so these brandscapes of distinction, are they good and for whom? That's the question I've been asking. And in some cities, they've even seen that these brandscapes start to show and signal the differences even more, in a sense like Jim Crow era signage, where you're branding a place as for certain people and not for other people. It reminds me a lot of, I guess, what scholars have called colonizing design, where the point is to attract attention, to create competition, and establish hierarchies. But this scholar says indigenous wisdom sees design as our natural tendency, right? It's something that we use to cooperate and co-create. Why can't we do that in places versus creating these brands? And I ask these questions coming very specifically from a place where I have done these activities. I've created custom typefaces, I've worked on neighborhood flags, visual identities for public spaces like libraries, and I've conducted participatory workshops with citizens to kind of come up with what's our brand, what's our identity. And I'm actually wondering if we need to be more like Samuel Maverick, who refused to brand his cattle because it inflicted pain, these maverick neighborhoods, so to speak. But when I tell people you shouldn't do it, I don't know what the alternatives are. I know they're out there, but I think it's very contextual to a place and to the communities within a place. And so what's the point of intervention when somebody says, hey, I'm thinking about having a logo for my business district, for my neighborhood, community, etc. Where can designers step in? There's tons of participatory work out there showing that citizens can answer questions like, what's our identity? But the decision to even get into this situation in the first place is often behind closed doors with experts, including designers. But what if we did something different than branding the place? Methods make designers. Design is a form of world making. And so what if these methods led to other worlds, like mutual aid projects like the one here in East Brooklyn? Instead of these place brands that end up creating competition, why don't we create mutuality? So my site of research is Price Hill, the land currently known as Price Hill, which was formerly the land of the Shawnee, the Osage, the Hopewell, and the Miami. It used to be called Boldface Hill in the name of Chief Boldface, and it's gone through all sorts of different ownership over the years. There's been all sorts of branding already in this site. Here's a book from 1894 talking about the advantages of Price Hill. And oftentimes it's easy to go to history, but I'm not sure how that design uses history to strengthen the quality of life today. It's a multi-ethnic site, and we could celebrate the diversity here, but just because the demographics are diverse doesn't mean there's actually integration of the very different communities within this space. How does one even create a brand for all these different communities within this giant space that is Price Hill? And so I'm breaking this down into 3 phases: expert interviews to talk to people about what's already happening here, surveys, conversations about the quality of life, and then I would like to do some creative workshops to ask what design can do in place of visual identity systems, or branding, I should say, and wayfinding that differentiates and competes. So I'd start with these expert interviews with organizations. I'd like to know what's their origin story, what's the quality of life activities they're working on, how do they use or have they used design or design experts in the past, what are their challenges, and who else should I talk to here in the neighborhood about these things. The next phase is a survey or casual conversations with people in the neighborhood about quality of life, knowing what communities they say they belong to versus just Price Hill in general. What's their ideal quality of life? How do they characterize and how do they see signs of quality of life in Price Hill? What are the challenges to quality of life? How do they use design? And then workshops. I hope these be highly creative, where people get to visualize the threats to quality of life, the supports of quality of life, and opportunities for design-driven, community-led practices, where they could share these responses and we can collect them and start to see where they correlate. across the different methods. So we see here, like correlating these interviews through the mixed methods. And what do we see as possible collaborative design activities, again, outside of the branding activities, that actually strengthen the quality of life in a place like an urban setting like Price Hill? And so as far as outcomes go, I could see this being a tool for designers that they use when somebody comes and asks them, hey, we want to brand our urban space, our public space. And it could be some sort of participatory exercises they go through that say, like, what are the alternatives to doing this? And then a website that collects all the things that we found in the workshops here in Price Hill as activities. See it almost like the beginnings of Community Design Lab. And I think there's precedent for this. There's a recent branding anthology that came out that talks about now is the time to hit the reset button on these activities and reconsider their purpose and goals. And so that's what I'd like to do here in Price Hill. This last page, I thank you for listening, is a list of sources that I've collected in order to create this presentation. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone, my name is Jennifer Yacoub. I'm a visual communications designer based in New York and Cairo. Today I'll talk to you about my research studies I've done during my time at SCAD, the growth mindset for designers. What is a growth mindset and what are the methods designers can use to develop the mindset? A little bit about my background. I grew up in Cairo and I moved to the US in 2012 because I got accepted into the visual arts program at Rutgers. Since my childhood, I've been exposed to different cultures and mindsets, which inspired my research project. 2 years ago, I decided to apply for graduate school and continue my education at Savannah College of Arts and Design, after they offered me a scholarship through their master's program in design management. Before starting the program at SCAD, I was already researching the problems designers are facing today. My master's was in design management, and I want to start off by defining design management. Design management applies the design thinking methodology to identify problems, create systems, and bring innovative solutions to organizations, creating meaningful value. I decided to focus my thesis on how can I use the design management methods to introduce a growth mindset for designers, to enable career success and bring new innovative ideas to design and impact real change in the world. Throughout my research process, I used different design research methods. I won't be discussing them all, but I'll be sharing my key learnings and highlights from project framing, project positioning, research planning, design opportunities, prototyping, and final design to market. I was inspired by Dr. Carol Dweck's book about mindsets, where she talks about the different types of mindsets. This is one of my favorite quotes from her book. Just learning about the growth mindset can cause a big shift in the way people think about themselves and their lives. There are two main types of mindsets that she discusses in her book, the fixed and the growth. The fixed mindset is believing that intelligence is static, and the growth mindset is believing that intelligence can be built. And the third mindset that she discusses is the false growth mindset, when believing that you have a growth mindset, but you don't. What really is important for designers here is that they need to know that they could have a growth mindset in specific areas, while other areas they could have a fixed mindset. Through my secondary research, I learned that innovative companies today are welcoming executive-level designers. Designers recognize a need to continuously amplify their skills and knowledge to succeed in their careers. I concluded that good design comes through a process and a mindset. That led me to my umbrella question, which is how might we use design management methods to introduce a growth mindset for designers? Throughout my research, I figured out that designers designing products used by the people around the world lack culture awareness and international exposure. My target audience were designers such as visual, graphic, user interface, user experience, industrial designers, design educators in the graphic design department, industrial design, design management, and lastly, design leads at innovative companies such as VP of Design, Head of Design, and seniors. I interviewed and researched different designers. These are some of the amazing designers who've helped me with my thesis and process. My professors at SCAD from the Design Management Program, Bruce, Peter, Tom, Kristen Myers from IDEO, Mina Khalili from University of South Carolina. Some of the quotes I collected from interviews had some common themes, words and phrases like international exposure, travel, leave your zip code, broaden your scope. A good designer is always curious, being intentionally uncomfortable, and changing your environment. After collecting interviews, my final research findings were divided up into 7 themes, which are collaboration, mentorship, environment, community, resources, travel, and accountability. These 7 themes were the important factors for designers to be successful and acquire the right mindset. I collected my research and insights, and I came up with 6 possible different design concepts that could help solve the problem. Through concept development and testing, I decided to move forward with the top 3 and create a program designed for designers to develop the growth mindset. The final concept is the Malleable Design Experience. The Malleable Design Experience program, also known as MDX, is designed for designers to develop a growth mindset through a mentor guidance and travel to gain international and culture exposure. The program is designed to make designers malleable, to be willing to adapt to change. The program assigns every designer with a mindset mentor, where they can help develop that mindset needed while improving certain skills they need to work on. Designers will visit design universities in other countries, meet creatives from other fields, and get to be exposed to culture and people to learn from, and of course, offering educational resources along the way. The next step I did is prototyping a landing website and a dashboard for MDX. The website is where designers would land on and get to know more information about the program. If they apply, they'll get assigned a mentor and set goals and reach them. The growth tracker is a feature designed for designers to track their goals and growth. I'm also currently designing this card game that includes challenging mindset questions that will help the designers look and think about problems from a different perspective. These questions will help the designers or the team of designers to develop that growth mindset. They could be used for individuals and teams. I want to thank you for tuning in, and you can find more about my project and about me at jenniferyacoub.com or on Instagram at jen.yacoub. So thank you.